Do I remember how to do this? Let's give it a try. Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Long time no see. I got quite sidetracked by a lot of stuff I don't want to talk about, at least for now. And then, after such a long break from Booktube, I was having a little trouble re entering this wonderful community. And that is where the off the shelf tag comes in. Let me back up for a minute. The tag was created by the lovely Mike over at the channel Bibliophile Bookscape. I was tagged by a few people. Andrew at the channel You Could Be Reading More, Robert G., Reader of Books, and Steve Donoghue. When he tagged me, Steve suggested that this particular tag might be a great way for me and a few other nearly former booktubers to stick our toes back in the booktube waters. And it does seem that way to me too. Some of the questions in Mike's tag ask us to think about how not only our external responsibilities but our personalities might affect us, not only as people but as readers, and also perhaps as, quote, content creators here on Booktube. So let's get started. Question number 1. When you're not filming or reading, what does a normal day look like in your life? I have a very flexible work schedule since I do freelance work from home, so my days don't necessarily follow an exact pattern. I usually start the day by meditating, and then I turn on my bedside light and read for an hour or two before going for a walk for 45 minutes or an hour or so. Then I make myself a cup of tea or sometimes coffee and sit down to work. On days that aren't work days for me, I often go into downtown DC to go to an art museum or a library, or more recently, a physical therapy appointment or something like that. In the evenings, after I make dinner, I usually watch some Booktube and do some more reading. Then I check email one last time and jot down what I need to do the next day, then brush my teeth, wash my face, and put foot cream on my cracked heels before I crawl into bed and turn out the lights. Number 2, what kind of work do you do? And does it change how you read or what you notice in books? I'm a recovering academic historian, and while I don't teach or write anymore, I do work with young scholars on their projects, and sometimes assist more senior scholars edit their books in progress. It affects my reading profoundly since I need to keep up, at least to a degree, with academic nonfiction in a few very particular fields. I've made the decision not to talk about those books at all on Booktube, partly because I want to make sure I have a bit of an incentive to read broadly just for pleasure, and Booktube gives me a place to have conversations with readers about those books that I'm reading just for enjoyment. The third question, are you a morning person or a night owl? I am more a morning person than a night owl, but I'm not an especially early riser. I love to wake up naturally when sunlight starts to filter through my very thin curtains, and that works really well during the summer here where I live. I tend to shift to slightly later wake-up times during the darker months, and I just discovered alarm clocks that can use increasing light rather than sound for the alarm, and this seems perfect for me. Because I'm deaf in one ear and sleep with my hearing ear down, I can't rely on auditory alarms. So for years, I've used alternatives. A terrifying flashing alarm with an incredibly loud buzz back when I had to get up very early in order to teach a class. And then I used vibrating alarms that slip under the mattress. Now I have a digital watch that will gently vibrate when I set the alarm. But the gentle fake sunrise of a visual alarm clock seems like a great option for me. This is really a lot of detail about stuff you probably have no interest in, but I'm a little out of the habit of Booktube. Number 4, do you recharge by being alone or by talking with people? Recharge by being alone. I need a certain amount of quiet time to come back to myself. The next question is related. What drains you more? Too much socializing or too much isolation? And the answer is too much socializing. But honestly, the right amount of socializing, especially in small groups, and perhaps especially with old friends I have loved for decades, is incredibly important to me too. I'm extremely introverted, but I have a great group of friends, and I can't imagine life without them. For decades, a group of us have gotten together every week for what we call happy hour. During COVID, we started doing it via Zoom, and we still do that for many of our weekly meetings. Happy hour is not always what it is, it's not always happy. Together, we've all gone through some really hard times. Everything from difficult work experiences to the death of spouses, from long-time care of elderly parents to political crises, etc. Having those friendships matters more to me in the long run than having my isolated quiet time. But I do need that quiet time to be able to be fully open to my friends, old and new. The next question, what's something that you enjoy that has nothing to do with reading? I love to knit, which I learned from my grandmother when I was a very young girl, and then shared with both my son and my husband. I also adore cooking, especially cuisine from various Indian traditions. And when the weather is beautiful, as it is now, I love puttering around in the garden. All these things help me recharge too. Number 7, do you like planning things ahead of time or figuring things out as you go? I'm somewhere in the middle, I guess. I learned back in high school that to get everything I wanted to get done, or even most of what I wanted to get done, I needed to plan things out. But I rather enjoy going with the flow when I don't need to be working off a checklist. For example, I recently returned from some time visiting family at the beach where I grew up. We had work to do pretty much every day, starting around 11 or 12. I made lists and checked them off for that work. But for the time in the morning, before our work started, I could do what I pleased and what the weather allowed me to do. I would sleep until I woke up naturally, then perhaps go for a long walk on the beach, and maybe stop at an outdoor cafe overlooking the ocean for a cup of coffee and a little reading from the book I brought, or often something on my e-reader. I really appreciated having my mornings be just open, even though I quickly fell into a basic habit. Knowing I didn't have to check anything off a list made it feel like healing time. The next question, do you like working alone or alongside others? I love working alongside others, even though I think my basic temperament is to work alone. One of the best experiences of my life was researching and writing a book together with a friend. It was a huge project that took several years, and while we each had our specialties, fundamentally, we each went over every single word that we wrote. Neither of us can claim a single sentence as our own. This was deeply collaborative work. And at the same time, we did a lot of the work alone. My co-writer would be doing signed interviews down in North Carolina while I was transcribing documents in the Library of Congress. Or we'd be writing first drafts or edits alone before we started passing them back and forth via email and then face-to-face. So that experience was miraculous, but really, I almost always loved collaborative work. I loved being a teaching assistant for beloved professors back when I was in graduate school. And then when I became a professor, I adored working with the new teaching assistants, etc. But none of these collaborative projects involved full-time work alongside someone else. They're fundamentally collaborations involving a certain amount of very solitary work, and that is what works for me, that combination. Question 9. Are you more sentimental or practical? I'm not sure either of these words apply to me. I don't think of myself as sentimental. Although maybe that's because I tend to define sentimental as basically sappy, and maybe that isn't really what it means. I do tend to analyze what will work best to accomplish whatever the goal is, which is, I guess, is on the practical side. But I also tend to think a lot about the emotional components of a decision, how other people are responding in the moment, as well as how the final project might affect others, etc. Question 10. What kind of pace do you prefer in life? Busy, steady, or slow? I absolutely hate high pressure situations. My mother lived for deadlines. When she was writing something or doing some project with a deadline, she'd often wait until the day before because she knew she could do the work so much faster and so much better if she had a pressing deadline. It made her concentrate. I am absolutely the opposite. If I'm facing a deadline, I try to get the work done a week or two in advance, even if I don't turn it in until the actual day. That way, the deadline is spacious, and I know I have time to review my work with a clear head, which I often need to do. So I guess I would like a slow pace of serious requirements and deadlines, but a steady pace of what I'm able to accomplish. Number 11. What's a simple task you strangely love? I love to cook, as I said earlier. Yes, I love to explore cookbooks and various cooking styles and try out elaborate recipes, but I also really love putting together even the most basic meals. Chopping up a bell pepper and scooping out a tablespoon or two of almond butter, even stuff like that brings me joy. Washing dishes, on the other hand, does not bring me joy. Number 12. Are you naturally early, on time, or late? Well, if we're talking about what time I arrive at someone else's door for a dinner party or whatever, I make every effort to arrive exactly on time. That often means I'm the first guest at a party, since so many people these days make a point to be at least a few minutes late. But honestly, as a person with a hearing issue, which I mentioned earlier, it's kind of nice to arrive before many other guests get there, since background noise levels often make me feel adrift. And this way I can talk to the hosts. So the answer might be on time here. But to be honest, I'm usually circling around the neighborhood for 10 minutes or so before knocking on the door and officially showing up for the party. I would never ring the bell before the official start time. But maybe because I'm often relying on public transportation and all of its vagaries, I want to guard against arriving too late. So I give myself a bit of cushion. Actually, back when my spouse was alive, we would also arrive early and drive around the block for a few minutes before arriving at the party. I guess we were worried about weird traffic in this very urban area. I don't remember. Probably it was just a character trait that the two of us shared. Get there early, but don't make an entrance until we're on time. Question 13. What motivates you more, curiosity or responsibility? This is really interesting. Curiosity is what motivates me, but a sense of responsibility sometimes helps me actually get something done, even when I'm not at all motivated to do it. Okay, on to 14. What do you tend to overthink, and what helps keep you grounded? What do I not overthink? If you've had more than a 2-minute conversation with me, you probably accused me of overthinking at least 2 things. I tend to attribute my overthinking habit to being an extreme introvert. Does that make any sense? To be honest, I tend to think that overthinking is exactly what grounds me. It helps me anticipate what's likely to happen or to understand what has already happened. It often helps me predict how other people will respond to conflicts. Although, of course, my overthinking is not always correct and doesn't always work out perfectly. Number 15. This is an interesting one, too. What's something you always notice when entering a room? Books. I am always intrigued to see what books people choose to read, to display in their public rooms. I'm also interested in how they organize their books, too. Still, I try really hard not to get sucked into the bookshelves if I'm visiting living people, people who are expecting me to interact with them and with whom I want to chat, too. So I've taught myself to restrain myself in the face of a bookshelf, even a really good bookshelf. The next question: what kind of humor do you naturally use? Well, a very old friend of mine described my personality as, quote, ridiculously earnest. I am not, sad to say, especially funny, but I love having friends who are funny, often making me laugh until I cry. My father was hysterically funny, and his favorite lines were often situation driven puns. I definitely inherited the love of puns, but not the natural ability to spin them out in the moment. My mother, who was also an unfunny, earnest sort, appreciated my father's sense of humor so much. And when he died, that might have been what she missed the most. At some point, when my brother moved in with her to help take care of her in her final years, she expressed that what she loved most about having my brother there with her was that he was funny in many of the same ways Dad had been. So yes, we were both just major appreciators. Number 17. Do you usually multitask or single task? I cannot multitask. I often wonder if that is a result of the fact that I'm deaf in one ear. It makes me one-sided, as Eudora Welty might say. If I'm reading or cooking or whatever and there's music on, I just won't be able to absorb the music. I only have one track in my mind. I guess there is an exception. I can knit while listening to an audiobook or even watching Booktube or a film, as long as my knitting project is not too wildly elaborate. Maybe it's because there is no language involved in knitting, and not even any sound, basically. 18. What's your default reaction to free time? Plan or relax? Free time, meaning I don't have anything that needs to be done? I'd like to relax and maybe read an essay or a novel. The next one: are you comfortable with silence around other people? My natural state is to be fairly quiet around other people, and I don't feel at all uncomfortable with silence. But if I'm with someone even more introverted than I am, which has only happened to me a few times in my life, and they seem to be uncomfortable, I found that I actually have the ability to ask gentle questions and bring that person out. Dare I say that I seem to become more extroverted than my usual self? I rather like having that experience, and somehow it never feels stressful to me, even though I usually feel a little stressed about trying to be in a social situation, no matter how much I enjoy it in the end. And the last substantive question: do you usually remember conversations or impressions? I tend to remember conversations. I go back to my hearing loss here, and I don't know how that fits. You might think that I would have a better memory for visual impressions, but I don't at all. I don't have a perfect memory by any means, but I often remember meaningful conversations, even from decades ago. Perhaps it's because I have to use all of my energy to follow the conversation the first time. Or perhaps it's because I'm such a reader, trained in not only the importance of words, but also specifically the importance of dialogue. A caveat here: I'm not certain if impressions really refers to visual stimuli, but we're going to go with that for now. All that's left is to tag others. And since this tag is very much about us as people, I'd like to tag my two co-hosts of People, April, who I realize don't often film tags. Ros at Scallydandling About the Books, and Brian of the channel Bookish. Thanks so much, Mike, for creating this tag. What great questions. And thanks to Andrew, Bob, and Steve for tagging me. Steve was right that this is a great way to come back to the fold of Booktube. Finally, thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.